With all the discussion around AI, have we missed the script on opportunities left in the cloud? Have we done all the base work required to make AI happen the way it's supposed to? Maybe the two are more mixed up together than we're giving it credit for. Seth Robinson of CompTIA joins me as we explore thoughts on the market and where the customer needs really are. It's Wednesday, September 3rd, 2025, and I'm Dave Sobel. Welcome to the Business of Tech Lounge, the live version of the Business of Tech podcast. I welcome questions and comments throughout the show, so please put them in chat. If you have a question, we'll happily respond to it. Now, I want to thank Sales Builder, our Patreon sponsor, whose support makes this show possible. Focus on your IT sales workflow with the power of automation and visit them at salesbuilder.com. That's BUILDR.com. Now, a reminder, we're watching that chat and we'll take your questions in real time. Seth Robinson serves as the Vice President of Industry Research at CompTIA, a role he assumed in 2022. In this capacity, he leads research into technology trends affecting IT professionals and industry stakeholders, covering areas such as IT security, cloud computing, IoT, mobility, and AI. He's a frequent guest here on the show and a friend of the pod. Seth, welcome back to the live show.
Dave, thanks for having me again. Always great to be here with you.
I always enjoy mixing it up, and it was fun because we were bouncing an email back and forth, kind of thinking about the things we want to talk about, and you brought up a really interesting thought, the idea that there's all this discussion about moving out of the cloud era, and as we move into the AI era, but you kind of raised this thought of maybe we're not actually done in the cloud era. Give me a little bit of your thinking on what you mean by that.
I don't remember where I first heard this, but I came across it. I read it, heard it on a podcast, something exactly like you said, like, okay, now that we're closing out the cloud era and we're moving into the AI era. And it just made me think immediately, wait, are we really done with the cloud era? What would it mean to be done? How far have we actually come? And, what lessons can we apply as we're moving into AI? Because we're definitely moving into AI. But I don't know if it'll be, quite as cut and dry as like we're done with one and now we're moving into the other. I've studied cloud for several years now and studied AI for the past few. And I see, some similarities, some differences. And I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on what you see out there in the field as well in terms of adoption practices and in terms of what adoption practices can even be.
Well, you kind of brought up the bit that I wanted to focus on first was like, what would the end of the cloud era look like? And I'm not sure I know what an end point is, because if you talk about the idea of, well, everyone has moved to the cloud, like that's one theoretical end point, but it makes no actual practical sense, right? The idea that everyone will move everything into the cloud, we know isn't realistic because there are workloads even before AI. There are workloads that make more sense with on-prem or your own data center or colo or whatever that means. And by the way, AI looks like it's making that actually more complicated, but I don't want to get in AI yet. So I'm still trying to like get to this, like, well, what would the end state of cloud look like? And I could also put on the other hat of, well, the end state of cloud is we've rolled out all the SaaS that we need to. Like if we thought about this from the perspective of the transformation being we've reached peak SaaS, right? That might be the end of that. But I don't know how to measure that, right? And I'm coming up against this wall of I don't know how to measure what the end of that would look like. And by the way, if I go, think back, a leap or two before that, and I think about like the mobile transformation potentially, and I go, I also can't figure out an end state for that. I think what I'm coming up with is this idea of, well, we've reached enough saturation that the market is comfortable with the model. So I'll throw it back to you and sort of say, like, that was the best version of end state I came up with, was a comfort level on the market. And perhaps we don't think there's necessarily massive growth out of transformation, more that we've gotten comfortable with it. Kind of, what say you?
Yeah, I think that notion of being comfortable probably resonates with me. That feels like it rings true. I think the first thing that I think of is workflow and operations. Like, have workflow and operations been tuned to the point that they should be at if we're working with cloud models? And I think there are two pieces or two answers to that question. I think it's a fallacy to say, has every company, completely transformed their workflow to the point that maybe a startup would, since they don't have any legacy infrastructure and they're all using cloud computing. I don't think that a lot of companies can necessarily get to that point, kind of to your point about not every workload is going to go into the cloud. A lot of workloads are already on-prem or sitting somewhere. And the effort to migrate those is greater than the benefit that you're going to get out. But if you were starting from scratch, maybe you would choose to kind of build that workload so that it was operating on a public cloud infrastructure or whatever it might be. So to me, it comes down to workload and workflow quite a bit. And I would say that on the one hand, it doesn't feel to me like we're done optimizing, and maybe not,
legitimately has a significant mainframe business. And most years, I have not looked in several, and now I'm going to make a note to myself to do that. But most years leading up to when I kept pulling this out, say 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, it was always a growth business for them. Now, it wasn't a massive growth business, but it was a growth business. And it's not like we're saying like all of those things have gone away, so we've declared that. But we've certainly declared the end of the mainframe era. But that doesn't mean we're not selling them. So I think we have to sort of be realistic when we think about this from the perspective of like actually rolling out to say, oh, there's probably still opportunity there. It's just not growing the way it was, and it is thus mature. And we may link this to lower growth levels than any particular end state. Is that kind of how you look at it? Because you spent a little bit more time being an analyst on it versus like how much money can I make out of that particular bit? Tell me your thought.
Yeah, I think that we do want to try to make all of these eras, like this was the mainframe era, and this is the PC and the internet
Right.
era. And now we're in the cloud and mobile era. And to your point, those things don't just end on a certain date, and every company is now operating. I think the thing that jumped out to me is this notion of readiness to enter the next one, right? Like, are we now ready to jump into the AI era? And I think that that's where I feel a little bit of pause. Like a lot of companies might want to, but have they learned a significant or a sufficient number of lessons that they needed to have learned from cloud in order to be applying them appropriately to AI? Or are they going to make the same mistakes with AI that they are currently making with cloud or that they previously made with cloud? That's the thing that jumps out to me the most, and that gets to, I think, your comfort level statement before. Like we're comfortable enough with this to understand what the paradigm shift was, where we maybe made some mistakes, where we got the cart ahead of the horse when it comes to security or whatever it might be. And now we can correct those things as we enter into a new paradigm and as we're starting to use AI more. And I'll come back again to the workflow transformation, because I think all through cloud computing adoption, we kind of talked about, okay, you can forklift a workload and now it's running in the cloud the same way that it was running on-prem. But is that really giving you the benefit? Well, no, probably you need to transform that workflow some, and that's quite a bit of work. And I think a lot of companies have done that. But that's what is being faced now going into the next era is, are you ready to transform your workflow and transform some of the behavior among your employees? Because I think you and I have both seen many technologies come and go where the technology itself is superior, but adoption falters because it doesn't get stickiness enough with the employees in a business setting, right? And I think that gets even murkier these days when we're talking about consumer technology versus enterprise technology. And that was one of the things that cloud had going for it. It really didn't have a consumer play. To the extent that it had a consumer play, it was so far behind the curtain that nobody really even cared. They're just using an app on their phone and they don't care what's on the back end. And so really it had a little bit more chance to kind of breathe and become its own thing in the enterprise.
Now, I want to ask, because you mentioned the kind of best practices that organizations may not have adopted. Are there particular ones you're thinking of there? Because I want to make sure that I'm making some of this executable and practical for listeners. Like, are there particular best practices of the cloud era that you think are those warning signs or things that someone needs to invest in that you were thinking about when you mentioned that?
In terms of a warning sign, the first thing that comes to mind is the cybersecurity angle, right? And pursuing technology and assuming that you're going to figure out the cybersecurity stuff and the privacy stuff after the fact. I think we saw that in a big way with cloud adoption, that companies wanted to move to the new model to start saving money or to start being more efficient or to start being more flexible. But they weren't considering the entire package. They weren't considering maybe the total cost of ownership. They weren't considering the cybersecurity implications. I do think that a lot of companies have learned that lesson. But even in recent data that we collected around cybersecurity for an upcoming report, we still see some indicators that technology evaluation is happening in one place within the organization, and cybersecurity is happening in another place. So as much as those lessons may have been learned, there's probably still a little room to grow there. The other thing that comes to mind for me when I'm comparing cloud and AI is at this point with cloud computing, let's say like 3 to 5 years into cloud computing, we were talking very specifically about the different distribution models that were available. So platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, software as a service. We were talking in fairly fine detail about some of the financial implications and what some of the use cases would be. And I feel like we're not there with AI. It's still a little bit of a moving target. We talk about generative AI and how that's different from some of the AI and the natural language processing and things that came before. And then we talk about agentic AI is going to be the new thing, but I don't really see these models or frameworks kind of emerging of how you do these things beyond just letting your employees do it or purchasing software that has this stuff embedded. So that difference in defined frameworks is one thing that I noticed being kind of a standout between where we were with cloud adoption and where we are trying to go with AI adoption.
I want to throw it out to listeners and viewers. If you've got questions, throw them in the chat because we'll definitely take them. Seth, I've got one for you because I was writing my new monthly insider for my Patreon supporters, and one of the things that I noted in the past month was a lot of conversations around the potential move to outcome-based pricing. Let's start getting into some of the AI stuff. What was really intriguing to me was how many of the software providers over on the SaaS side are starting to really think about their pricing models. And I was getting into like Replicate and Cursor, and so you're starting to really have some conversations about the need to move to outcome-based pricing. Like we're going to pay for the tasks that the agentic AIs will work for, or the outcome based on the code. That was the one area as I was listening to you talk about like the pricing model changes. It's like my ears went up and said, well, I'm starting to see some early signs of that pricing model. I think I'd agree with you that it's not quite as far along on the time frame, but I am starting to see some emerging models. What's your take on that pricing model as we move toward the AI portion of the conversation?
We've been talking about outcome-based pricing for a little while, even with cloud stuff, right? I think that part of that model change, moving from CapEx to OpEx, was trying to figure out, am I getting what I pay for, or am I getting too much? Am I paying, too much? Do I have unused capacity there? What's going on? And so there was this notion of moving to outcome-based pricing. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of your listeners and a lot of the people that you talk to in the space, when we're talking about managed service providers and other technology enablement firms, if the place where they encounter friction is actually with the client who's asking this question and saying, I would love to have a way to only pay for the outcomes that I'm getting instead of like paying per compute module or storage node or whatever it might be, but it still is difficult for them to move away from that mental image of IT as a cost center. And so as much as they might feel like they want to move to a new pricing model, a lot of that move comes with understanding your own workflow, understanding your data flow, understanding where your storage is, understanding all of those things. And I don't know if a lot of companies are there. So they say, here's what I want for pricing, but that pricing kind of has a whole chain of effects that enable it that they haven't quite moved to yet. Does that sound right to you?
Well, it sounds, I was literally going to say, like, well, it supports the data that we were talking about. So I'm going to throw in sort of two data points. On yesterday's news show, I cited some stuff that Gene Marks said over in Forbes, because he argued that the narrative around small businesses adopting artificial intelligence is very misleading. And his take was, is there's a Goldman Sachs report stating that 68% of small business owners claim to be using AI. But his field experience across his client base is that really means experimenting with tools for tasks like email drafting and contract review versus like the kind of agentic workflow that many of us are talking about. The other data point that I cited yesterday was the recent study by TechIsle, where the shift among SMB focus is into strategic consulting over tool acquisition, because it's around exactly what you just said. They don't know what to do with these things. I need help understanding not how to get tools, but what to actually do with them. So those would be the two data points that I layer in there. And I think we're swinging right back around to your workflow point that we're re-examining what has to happen at the workflow layer. Is that making sense to you?
Yeah, I think if we're getting into the AI part of the conversation here, what I feel like I'm seeing, and especially kind of what I'm reading in between the lines, right? So like, I know you mentioned those data points. You mentioned a couple of other like projected data points coming from Gartner and another institution. But like you read between the lines and all of this, and what it feels like companies are doing is they're making these tools available to their employees, and so individual employees can use them to make themselves more productive. But when it comes to stitching that together to make a team more productive or the entire organization more productive, that's where all of this glue has to happen, and it's not just automatically scaling from individual employees using ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or some bespoke, LLM and chat creation. It's not scaling from that into the entire organization is using this, and now we can do the entire invoicing process better rather than highlight one piece of the invoice process and say we've gotten X% better at that. That is the part that still seems to be a little sticky here. And again, the stickiness, I don't think, is with the technology. The stickiness is in changing behavior, changing workflow, changing patterns like that. And I don't know that we really understand all the reasons why one technology might start to get mass adoption and really start to push companies in one direction or not. But we've seen this come over the years, and I think there's so much hype and potential around AI right now that I don't think we're going to get the answer in as short a time frame as we have with some other technologies. But I think it is still an open question about exactly how productive is this going to be at scale.
Well, I think that that's ultimately that's some of the question too. Is that the difference is not showing up for me necessarily in the data points, but I will say I'm starting to get the anecdotal evidence of specific projects that are being deployed. I'm going to tease that I'm going to run a interview clip in a little bit, later in the show, of an interview that's coming out this weekend that literally is talking with an MSP of size. They're doing about $30 million in revenue that actually are rolling out customer facing chatbots for boutique hotels. Like they have actually, and it isn't theoretical, they walk through specific implementations that are happening. That's changed for me in, say, the last 6 months or so, where I was talking to, when I would talk to larger, the MSPs out there and do interviews, it was a lot of pilot programs. It's like, well, I've just started now hitting the point where I'm actually having conversations about people rolling out specific production level projects. Again, it's not like I'm citing there are hundreds and thousands of this, but it's, 2 and 3 in a row in interviews, that starts becoming a pattern. Is there like some kind of tipping point in adoption? You're a guy who spends a lot of time trying to survey and get this into data. Is there a tipping point we look for in terms of adoption on production projects where we can say that we've achieved some level of mass adoption?
I think when we have talked about adoption in a lot of our surveys in the past, we try to make a distinction between, I guess, like low stakes production and high stakes production, right? So
Okay.
that example of like, a chat bot for hotels, you know, is that low stakes or high stakes? It probably depends a little bit on the company, right? But it
Right.
seems to me like it could be a little bit on the lower stakes end, right? That if something goes wrong with that chatbot, you can kind of default back to like a, you know, in-person conversation or something like that. You know, we're not exactly talking about like a workflow that's dealing with financials or something that's going to break down and there's going to be a cybersecurity attack, you know, something like that that could really impact operations. You know, there are these things that are kind of on the periphery, and they begin to work their way towards, as you get comfort with those, as you learn some lessons with those types of things, then you work your way towards taking a little bit more risk with your high stakes production stuff. So I agree with you. I feel like a lot of the examples that I hear, they're either on this individual basis or it's a rollout of a chatbot or something like that that definitely improves things, but isn't quite getting at like the heart of the business, right? It's not quite getting at like the crown jewels yet. And so what needs to happen for companies to be comfortable enough to start to put those things into AI systems or start to try to automate those pieces, and especially with AI, have a little less visibility into the inner workings and try to be trusting the output.
Gotcha. A reminder, if you're watching, throw in the questions because we'd love to tackle them. It was interesting for you to layer on the idea of risk, like business risk, in there, because I think I could make a pretty solid argument that some of the customer service chatbots do impact the ability to do revenue, particularly at the scale that some of them can do. So, for example, if you're doing customer service and you're able to serve hundreds of customers, whereas an individual human may only be able to handle, say, 60 or 50 or 100 an hour, where the bot can handle 500 or 1,000, there's direct revenue link that I can see there, right? But I'm with you that like the risk of that going horribly wrong is difficulty. And again, to cite some interesting stories, dropping on today's podcast, I updated on what is going on with Taco Bell. Did you catch the viral 18,000 water cup story? Because it's very funny, if nothing else. Taco Bell was trying out the rollout of AI bots at their drive-throughs, and in low volume circumstances, they've actually found that it works very well. But in high volumes, in their circumstance, it becomes problematic. But additionally, somehow they forgot to take into account users gaming it. The best one was the guy who drove up and asked for 18,000 water cups, and then the system got confused and threw him to a human. And so you look at that and say, well, it's clearly revenue linked, but how much of a risk is that? I mean, I don't know. Drive-through going bad on a high volume day could be very detrimental to that business, but it's not life and death. Like, it's not the same idea as putting in a surgery. Like, how do you think about measuring risk in those circumstances? Like, what are the kind of the levers that you put on to think about risk?
I mean, I think that is one of these things that a lot of companies are working through when it comes to technology, right? Is like
Right.
how much risk are we willing to take on? What does that mean for our cybersecurity strategy? We're starting to see more companies do that over the past, I would say, like 5 years, right? And again, this is that shift from a tactical mindset or a secure perimeter into using technology more strategically, and not knowing exactly how you do the ROI calculation on something that used to be a cost center. But how are we making these investments, and what does that mean? And especially with AI now, like the example that you mentioned, I think is kind of a classic one, and we've heard versions of that before, right? And I think even before AI, I always think about like the automated operator systems that we all call into, and we've learned to game those, right? Like,
Right.
speak to an operator. I'm not choosing one of your options, whatever. Um, how does that type of thing translate into AI? So like AI can do it better, but is it still giving me the answer that I'm looking for? Right? You've scaled it out, and it improves things, in the center of operations by 90%, but it makes the corner cases way much worse, right? Like nobody
Right.
due to a real person. And so how do you balance that? And so I think companies are really trying to put together a complex equation of like, where do we want to make technology investments? What does that say about our risk profile? how are we going to mitigate that risk? Because we can't just assume that this stuff is going to work all the time, or we can't afford to wait on the sidelines until it does work all the time or at a high enough rate. We need to move fast. We need to move quickly. We talk a lot in the technology space about moving quickly, but then a lot of things get broken, right? And not every company has the resources to fix all those breaking things if they're moving a little too quickly.
Now, you and I have been having this conversation about the consultative shift. I feel like for a while, right? This is something that we've talked. Is there something about it now in the AI era, as we've now embracing that? Is there something that's different about that conversation, or do you view it and say like this is fundamentally the same thing that we've been having the conversation the whole time? What's your take on that?
I think it's an expansion of that conversation, because I think that conversation is rooted in the complexity of these technology systems. There are all these layers of abstraction, and if everything's working perfectly, then all those layers of abstraction don't matter that much, and you just get what you want as the output. But if things aren't working well, or if you want to make a refinement or a customization, then you need to understand all of these different layers. And in some of our white papers where we talk about strategic IT and the fact that the computing platform has now been built out now, and there's not a lot of energy going into making that platform better. There's a lot of energy going into making more and more complex applications on top of that platform. So AI is another layer of complexity. And in some cases, maybe it reduces complexity of an application to the end user because they can just make things happen with a prompt. But on the back end, to the people that have to implement these things, and in the event that something goes wrong, there's now a new layer of complexity in there. And ultimately, I think companies are moving towards this place where they really need to understand that complexity so that they can make the proper decisions on risk or investment or whatever those things are that we just talked about.
All right, I'm going to ask one that's sort of a mini lightning round to wrap us up here. I want to get your take on something. Vibe coding, thing or not?
Thing, but maybe not a thing as defined by the people that originally defined it, right? So is coding going to change? Yeah, probably. Is it completely going to become this nirvana of, just putting in an idea and you get out perfect code? Also, probably not, right?
Well, I think that sums it up right there. Is that it's never the perfect nirvana that we're looking for. Seth, this is great fun. I love having you on. If people are interested in continuing the conversation, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
You can check out a lot of our research at CompTIA.org. And if you have any specific questions for me, feel free to reach out to me at srobinson@CompTIA.org, and I'll be sure to get right back to you.
Well, Seth, looking forward to having you on again in the future. These are always a lot of fun.
Thanks, Dave.
Now, I want to highlight an interview that's dropping. Ephraim Epstein, who's the founder and CEO of Upfit Solutions, shared his insights on the growing demand for AI integration in businesses and how it transforms interactions. I alluded to it earlier. He discusses real-world applications, such as an AI-driven concierge service in hotels and its impact on labor costs and customer satisfaction. Here's a preview of that interview, talking about that specific example.
One that we do a lot of these is hotels. So we've been getting kind of it started with boutique hotels. Now we're starting to move upstream. But basically, someone checks into a hotel, and boutique hotels where we started don't have a lot of staff. They can't afford a full-time staff. So a lot of them operate much more like an Airbnb, where you check in, you get your email, you get like a door code in. There might be someone obviously there's cleaning staff, but there might be someone at the front desk for certain hours, but not even 24/7. Some have traditionally had that, but a lot of the boutique hotels we were working with were using like VA staff, virtual assistants, or you know what I mean, in the Philippines or whatever. So they would use them. So to reduce labor, what we did is we created AI employee. The first one we ever created, her name was Brooklyn. She's for a hotel named Hotel Zindel. And someone goes to Hotel Zindel. She would text you and say, "Hey, Dave." And she would do this probably day of the check-in. She texts you, And you still get your emails and all that stuff. But she'd say, hey, Dave, this is Brooklyn from Hotel Zindel. I'm your personal concierge. If you need anything, recommendations, anything you need, let me know. I'm here to help. Second later, she sends another message, be like, oh, if you have any other issues, like getting registered, getting into a room, let me know. Then if you may or may not reply, a few hours later, she's like, hey, just want to check on you. Were you able to get into the room? Now, if you engage, you ask her for recommendations, or you ask her that you need more towels or pillows or anything like that, she's going to be able to not only have full conversations with you, but she'll also, like, the automations will do certain tasks, like let the cleaning people know, hey, bring some towels, or bring extra pillows, or clean the room, or if you want to know like the best bars with live music tonight, she's going to tell you. And we've gotten really good at making those conversations so human-like. We can even make them with blue bubbles, so it looks like it's coming from an iPhone. That we're having tens of thousands of messages go out, and unless there's a hallucination or something goes wrong, no one knows they're talking to AI. In fact, we have full conversations. We have people thanking the AI employees in Google reviews and stuff. They think they're talking to them.
Now, without giving away too much of the secret sauce, how much of this is stuff that you've put together with off-the-shelf software and customized and integrated? How much is stuff that you had to build from scratch?
Yeah, there's no secret sauce. I mean, we've learned from others, just like other people have. But to create an AI employee, so far, in a year from now, there's probably chatbots that can do everything that we're talking about as good as we're doing it. But as of right now, to actually create one AI employee, we have not found like a turnkey solution that does it. So basically what we're doing is we're using currently ChatGPT Brain. We're using like N8N. It's kind of like a Zapier. And then we're like integrating with a texting platform. We use a lot of Go High Level. We can use others. And then we're also integrating if there's a CRM involved, other places, if there's data that needs to be pulled. So on average, we're on a very, very small implementation. There's a minimum of probably 3 integrations. On more complex, there might be 7, 8 integrations that we have to do. One AI employee, the average amount of workflows and automations is around 400. And, training of the AI usually between like 80 pages of training. So it's a lot of engineering labor. Like people don't, they think AI just magically does it. But for it to actually do tasks and have human-like conversations and not sound like AI and get through all the texting rules and everything that's involved with that, it's a significant amount of engineering work and ongoing labor associated with, managing, maintaining, fine-tuning, additional integrations, all of that.
This is a $30 million MSP talking about their real rollouts. Seth and I talk about consulting and all the project rollouts. This is that. My Patreons already have this interview now. If you want to get access early, it's a benefit of supporting the show. Visit patreon.com/MSPradio to sign up and get access right away. The interview will drop on the YouTube channel and podcast feed this weekend. I want to thank Sales Builder, our Patreon sponsor, whose support makes this show possible. Focus on your IT sales workflow with the power of automation and visit them at salesbuilder.com. That's BUILDR.com. Vendors, you too can get your name mentioned on the live show. It's a simple monthly subscription. Visit patreon.com/MSPradio to learn more. And listeners, here's how you can support the show. Make sure to like, share, and follow on your favorite platforms. They really do make a big difference, particularly making sure you're subscribing and following on the appropriate platform makes a big difference in our growth. We're building some new things on Patreon right now. If you want to learn about what's coming, it's a great time to sign up and get new insights. New podcasts, new content, additional insights, things like that monthly insider that I was talking about, and you still get access to videos early. Visit patreon.com/MSPradio to learn more. And if you have a question and are listening to the recording, send it in at question@mspradio.com, or if you're watching on YouTube, put it in the comment section below. Thanks for joining me for the Business of Tech Lounge, and I will see you next time.